Hi, you're watching a very special session of Agenda AWANI right here at the World Economic Forum in Davos. And I've always been wanting to get people from the inner sanctum of World Economic Forum. These unsung heroes who are behind the scene. We only read their reports, read their emails and findings. Sometimes their names don't even come out. But I do know that it is very powerful. Just being here for 3-4 days during the World Economic Forum is powerful. Imagine if you're inside the inner sanctum of World Economic Forum. I've spoken to one, Nicholas. Now I'm speaking to Gemma Corrigan. Thank you so much, Gemma, for making time. You're not really in the best of health. The weather's getting to me and you. But we try this because every time there's the World Economic Forum, there'll be a slew of reports being launched. Last year, I was very taken by the Oxfam and WEF report. You know, half the world population owns as much as only 8 of the world. And this year, there was this other reports released. And it's the Inclusive Development Index report. And guess where Malaysia is? Number 13.
Yes.
Many of my audience maybe would not have guessed. Why is Malaysia at number 18? And what is the biggest finding of this report when it was announced?
So I think one just point of clarification. So we launched the index on Monday here in Davos, and it's actually second edition of the report this year. And we have 2 groups of countries. So we rank advanced economies and emerging economies. And so Malaysia ranks 13th out of 74, so they do quite well. That's really driven by the strong levels of growth and productivity that the country has been seeing. However, when you break this down, we have 3 scores that underlie this ranking. One is the growth and development, the inclusion, how well the growth is shared, and lastly, intergenerational equity and sustainability. So how much is this going to be maintained over the long term? And you see Malaysia does very well on the first pillar, but on the second and third pillar, it ranks 31st and 32nd. So I think on average, it's doing quite well, but there's still some areas, that are signal future improvements.
Let's call it work in progress.
Yes.
And that's what I want to touch upon here because I was at the peak of Jacob's Horn. There was the Chinese Business Leaders Summit, and there was the Nobel winner of economics in 2015, Sir Angus Deaton. And reading his articles online and just meeting him and interviewing him, you get his assertion that inequality is not to be blamed for disparity. What's to be blamed for disparity is the lack of honesty, transparency, and fairness in wealth creation and aggregation of wealth. So I want to put that to you, since you look at inclusive development and the categories of the index include how much is shared, and not only that, how much do we leave for the next generation, for example. So can I take that angle of fairness and inequality into the index?
Well, I think you need to take a very multidimensional approach to looking at how much is growth actually improving living standards. And I think for us, what's core measure is how much median incomes have improved. So is growth actually translating into more opportunities for the vast majority of the population? So I think fairness has a big part to do with that, to make sure that the proceeds are actually trickle down. But inequality is obviously one measure which captures an unfair system.
Okay. We in Malaysia pride ourselves in really putting education on top of everything else. So I want to treat this session as a learning process. And we are number 13, but we want to know about the best ones, the top up there, and maybe the best practices so that we can go there. If you can single out one at the very top and why they are there.
Well, I think Norway, for the second year in a row, tops the advanced economy group. They really perform well across the board, so focusing on not only sustainability as well as inclusion, having strong social protection, a good safety net, which I think is something that a lot of countries in ASEAN and actually globally could improve, especially as we look to the fourth industrial revolution and the technological disruptions to come. If we don't have an adequate social safety net to capture people when they fall and help bounce them back up, I think that's something that's very important, as well as fair labor rights. When you look at collective bargaining, strong trade unions, those are core to ensuring that pay and productivity are in line. That we've seen a lot of declines in labor share of income recently, and we noticed that a lot of times, even though productivity is rising, wages aren't keeping up; they're stagnating.
Yes.
So I think that's something that needs to be explored further.
I have to go for the first break, but once we are back, I want to lay the context for the second segment, which is there's a lot of technology companies this year around in Davos itself. When you walk along the promenade is the main, street for World Economic Forum. Cryptocurrency alone, oh my God, huge. And then there's AI, and there's VR, and there's specific technology companies. But are we repeating the gaps of the last industrial revolution? Because once you're a technology company, if you hit the turf, running, sweet spot, you're like gigantic straight away. And but that doesn't mean that you will be inclusive and be thinking of the impact of social impact, marginalized, disenfranchised, or inclusion. So with Moore's law, that's going to exacerbate the gaps in between. So I want to get your take on the fourth industrial revolution, the rise of technology companies and startups, and maybe how does that bode for this gap? Is that going to make this gap closer or larger? We'll discuss that after the short break. You are still watching a very special edition of Agenda AWANI right here at the World Economic Forum Davos, and the first press conference at the Media Village for WEF 18 was with IMF. And like it or not, that sets the tone of economic growth, that sets the tone of income, that sets the tone of disparity and equality, because Madame Lagarde herself put out that point. So I want to lay on top of the Inclusive Development Index and stuff, where technology plays a vital role. The fourth industrial revolution is all about how technology changed every aspect of humanity and life. But it's a known fact. If you're a big technology company, look at the top countries of the world by GDP, put technology companies in there, and they'll be right on top there. So wouldn't that exacerbate the gap rather than close it? The presence of big technology companies and how business is being done right now, driven by them more than anything else, because I don't think social inclusion is going to be at the top of the agenda of any technology company.
Well, I think when you look at the big technology shifts that we're seeing, that it does pose a big risk for widening the gaps that we're already seeing, but I also think it presents a lot of opportunities in the sense that they could be transformational, improving access to a wealth of services, making things more affordable. However, I think it's really for businesses and governments to work together to see how we navigate this transition that we're seeing, and how do we make sure that technology brings more inclusion rather than more polarization.
There's this phrase at this World Economic Forum that I want to quote here. If we were to be alive at any time of history in humanity and mankind, this is the best time. How do you subscribe to that phrase? Yes. And how do you think it can be related to making the index better in terms of score for all the countries involved?
Well, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I'm a natural optimist, so I think that we have everything at our disposal. It's just really putting the leadership and the willpower to the test to see how we can make use of these resources for the betterment of all, to solve the biggest challenges that we've seen. I think there's no position like today.
Yes, there's Norway on top, but there are other countries on top, at least on top of Malaysia, 12 others. What are the other lessons that you can share from other countries? Because I think sometimes a country will have less growth, but they have more sharing. And that's important too. And everybody knows, because of social media now, how Bhutan is right up there in happiness index. So you look before this latest index, you look at global competitiveness index, you look at global risk index. So I think we go for the last break, but once we are back, I can give you time for that. How do you weave all this competitiveness, risk, and now inclusiveness, and then that happiness thing? Because you might have the highest growth, you might share the most, but still your society might not be a happy society. And many of the growth are very strongly leveraged to GDP. And GDP has been criticized by itself as a measure of indicator of progress. But that's the best that we have right now to measure. And many more people are looking at viable alternative way of quantifying progress. So before I go to the GDP and happiness, maybe you can share from a technical aspect maybe. Is World Economic Forum looking at other measures and indicators of progress?
I think the Inclusive Development Index really seeks to be this new measure, this broader measure of progress that actually is the way people benefit, actually evaluate their economy success, because GDP alone doesn't capture, how much the average person's benefiting. So we really see this new measure and this new index that we launched as an alternative that we hope countries will start using to have a broader sense of progress.
Is participation of countries important to make the index a bit more? Because some data are not open, some data are closed, and we know that in the world of data and statistics, the missing out of one or two aspects can greatly skew the results.
Well, if I could do a plea for some better data, I think social mobility is a very interesting indicator, but we don't necessarily have all of that for a wide range of countries. So that's one area that we would hope that in the future we could look more closely into to see how much one person's chance of success is tied to their parents' success, or is it that everybody has an equal chance to succeed in
So you need the data of the parents and the current siblings of theirs. We go for the last break, but once we are back, like I promised before, we want to look at indicators to happiness. Gemma is arguing the point that this new index is the index to look at, but also want to weave in not just happiness, but culture. It's here at the World Economic Forum 18 in Davos. As I was walking along the promenade, there was this huge pavilion and center for Indonesia. The rave now is all about India because of the plenary session by Prime Minister Modi. But Indonesia, my biggest neighbor for Malaysia, they are here. And in the pavilion, they talk about creative economy. And in that creative economy, it's all about the produce from weaving, or we have this great design that you must try out called batik for clothes, and trinkets and whatever else. And they're trying to network the creative economy of the world, because otherwise it'd be drowned in maybe an e-commerce mall and stuff. And I think culture is part of happiness, because you've got to feel belong before you can talk to other people. And like Prime Minister Modi quoted from the legendary Mahatma Gandhi, I want to feel the winds of the world coming from all the windows that are open in my house. But I don't want the wind to disrupt and uproot me, if I can put it that way. So let's talk to Gemma right after this short break, making her more Asian, to talk about more cultural and values into the inclusiveness issue. You are still watching a very special recording of Agenda AWANI right here at the World Economic Forum 2018. This is the Media Village. Nice trees, nice snow. I know, right? Malaysia don't have snow. So I'm still talking to Gemma. Gemma is the practice lead. Nice title. Inclusive Growth, Future of Economic Progress World Economic Forum. But we've talked about the happiness thing. I want to reveal the cultural thing, because like I said, there's even here at the World Economic Forum creative economy linkages. And what's your take on that? Because she is the master of many important index, competitiveness, risk, and now inclusive development.
Well, I think the cultural aspect is very important. It's quite hard to quantify and capture, but I think when you look at some of the index, whether it be happiness or other measures of well-being, where people self-report this data, it's very interesting, and it's something that we definitely explored quite closely. But you often see that certain indicators that we have in our index are actually highly correlated to those general measures of happiness and well-being. So I think the Inclusive Development Index is actually a good predictor of happiness. And also another point that we did explore is how much inclusion is tied to interpersonal trust. Because we're here in Davos, and the theme of the annual meeting this year is looking at this fractured world.
Yes.
And obviously trust is very important to instill, to ensure better social cohesion. We've seen a lot of the inequalities and social frustrations erupt in the last year.
Yes.
And so we think that actually trust is an also very important measure to look at.
If I go back to the list in the index, of course Norway is right up there. And then this is something that always amazed me since the beginning of my career as a journalist. Any index that's worth looking at for the world, the Scandinavian countries will always be represented up there. So that's Norway. Of course, underneath is Luxembourg. Then that's Switzerland, where we are.
Yes.
Maybe that's a huge contribution of World Economic Forum. But then there's Iceland, Denmark, Sweden.
Yes.
There must be something about the Scandinavians that they are doing very, very right.
Yes, I think a lot comes down to gender equality. And I think you mentioned Madame Lagarde earlier, and I think the biggest proponent and call that she's often making is how much growth and equality we could have if we empowered more women. So I think that's a big area that the Scandinavians do quite well on, and I think the rest of the world can look to improve in order to become more inclusive as well as more productive and stronger economies.
Apart from Malaysia, which other Asian country that attracts your attention at the top line for this index?
Well, actually, when we look in the ASEAN countries, Malaysia leads the pack. So I think that in terms of Asia, Malaysia is quite well positioned. Thailand falls closely behind, also has quite an equitable system. I think when we look at educational equity, the fact that all students have an equal chance of getting a high quality, good education is what is really something important that you see in some economies in the region, but Malaysia could probably work to improve. But on the range of other areas, I think the country's doing quite well.
Cool. I can talk about the index until tomorrow, but let's celebrate Gemma here, because you have to celebrate gender empowerment right here at the 48th World Economic Forum. Never before. All the co-chairs, 7 co-chairs this time, they are all ladies, powerful ladies. So I know Gemma is powerful too. She might be Madame Lagarde in 15 years. She took economics and history, right? And political economy some more for your masters. So I want to talk to you as a person also. And first of all, what's your take? First time ever, 7 co-chairs, all females. And that's not counting the other females here and talking about great things stuff.
Well, I think it's fantastic. We couldn't be more thrilled to have such strong female leadership. I think that's the way of the future, and really looking down the road, I think, in order to have the success that we want to see. I think a level playing field is what we are really trying to aspire towards.
In your personal journey to be where you are here, you've been even to Argentina, I think, if I read your bio correctly. You have traveled a lot, you've seen a lot. Do you really feel that the time is now to break the shackles, glass ceiling or otherwise? Even with all this, I think the representation of leaders, female leaders at World Economic Forum, the figures have been bandied out on the internet, about 20 to 30% max. So there's still work to do even here. So the barriers that you have faced, but the hopes that you have seen, give us your personal take on gender empowerment.
Well, I think, as you very aptly put it, we've come a long way, but I think there's still a long way to go. I think this is just really the beginning, but I'm very optimistic for the future. I think we're on the right track, and with continued progress and effort, I think we'll eventually get there. I know this year, for the first time, we started to see that we were going a little bit backwards on the gender gap report, which was kind of a sign of alarm. But I think we've been trying to work hard now to kind of put it back on track.
What has been one of the most exciting discussions for you this time around at the World Economic Forum?
Wow, that's probably the hardest question I've gotten today. There are just so many great, rich discussions. I think we have had a few sessions that were very interesting. One was on looking for solutions for inclusive growth. Okay. So we know that this is a big issue, but a lot of economies and businesses are struggling with, what concretely can be done? How do they foster and achieve this new reality? So I think looking and digging into the solutions and rolling up the sleeves and figuring out, okay, what works, what doesn't work, how can we learn from one another has been really interesting. And I think in particular, looking at what is the role of business, how can businesses play a bigger part in fostering more inclusive and sustainable economies has been really interesting. And I think the traction around the Sustainable Development Goals and more companies mapping and putting that as part of their business strategy has been very fascinating and I think very exciting.
I want to tie gender empowerment, diversity and business opening up because, and I've shared this in many other sessions, on top of the mountain where the base camp was for the Arctic researchers, I heard at least 4 executives of very, very powerful companies in the world committing and pledging to work together with the scientists, which to me is a new thing, especially for Arctic and climate change. And there's even a code of conduct announced that has already been agreed. 6, I think, pillars to look out for when you go and do business in the Arctic. And Cristina Figueroa is a very remarkable figure and lady. She says now the narrative is not about, hey, we have to prepare these war chests to adapt to climate change. They are taking the business way of saying there's wealth to be made from fighting climate change. So based on that,
Well, I couldn't agree more. I think it's a win-win. And I think more and more companies are showing that they can actually make profit out of doing good. So I think the whole profit and purpose alignment hasn't been stronger. And the business case is very clear that, and I think that's the way of the future. I think more and more consumers are demanding it. I think when you look towards the next generation, they're going to be looking for businesses that don't put profits at the center, but actually purpose.
Okay. Data, very important. I don't have time to talk about big data, but it's all about that nowadays. And the research, it helps to have big data. But before I let you go, what does it feel to be a very bright, talented young woman working at the World Economic Forum?
Well,
how does it feel like?
I think there isn't a better place for a very entrepreneurial, innovative spirit. I think it's quite a diverse organization, and every day I learn something new. So I'm thrilled to be working there and to be here in Davos and exposed to the greatest thinkers of our time.
Thank you. That's the best summary for this discussion. You have been watching a special edition of Agenda AWANI right here at the World Economic Forum 2018 in Davos. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.